hospital at night was suffocatingly silent, the kind of quiet that made your ears strain for the smallest noise. As an orderly, I was used to the graveyard shift, used to the fluorescent hum and the distant, monotonous beeps of heart monitors. But once darkness fell, even the familiar became twisted. My refuge was a cramped basement office, a room lit by a flickering bulb and positioned uncomfortably close to the morgue. The proximity was a reality I tried to ignore, even when the cold air seeping through the walls reminded me what lay beyond. That night, it must have been close to 1 a.m. I sat in the office with Ethan, another orderly. The minutes bled into each other, marked only by the soft tick of the wall clock and the acrid smell of disinfectant that hung in the air. We were chatting idly, trying to ward off the sleep that tugged at our eyes. Then we heard them, footsteps. They weren't hurried, like a nurse rushing on an emergency or a doctor on a midnight round. These were slow, deliberate, and echoed with a rhythm that raised the hair on the back of my neck. We turned to the open doorway, expecting a familiar face. What we saw was anything but. A man drifted past, just a fleeting figure in the hallway's shadows. His eyes, wide and hollow, flicked toward us as he walked by, just enough for a shiver to slither down my spine. The tension between Ethan and me thickened. We shared a glance, our unease mirrored in each other's eyes. Moments later, the figure returned. This time, he stopped. He stood framed in the doorway, face washed in the sickly light from the hallway. He was pale, the kind of pale that seemed unnatural, almost translucent. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as if they hadn't closed in days. His clothes were tidy, but they looked outdated, like something from an old photo. "Do you have access to the morgue?" His voice was low, rough around the edges, like it hadn't been used in years. Ethan and I exchanged a look. His request wasn't completely out of the ordinary. Funeral pickups could happen late. But something about him made my skin prickle. "Yes," I replied cautiously, my voice barely masking my growing unease. The man's eyes sharpened, a glint of something manic sparking behind them. "I'll pay you to let me in, just for an hour," he said, leaning forward. "I need to be alone with the bodies." The air turned cold. His words settled like a weight on my chest. Ethan's eyes widened, disbelief crossing his face. I felt my pulse quicken, my mouth going dry. The room seemed to shrink, the shadows pressing in. "No," I managed, my voice more confident than I felt. "We can't do that. It's against policy." For a moment, he didn't react, as if he hadn't heard me. His gaze stayed locked on mine, and I felt exposed, like he was peeling back layers I didn't want seen. Then, slowly, his expression changed. The spark in his eyes darkened, his jaw clenched, and a muscle in his cheek twitched. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until the silence closed in again. Ethan exhaled, a shaky breath that mirrored the one I hadn't realized I was holding. The room felt colder now, and I could almost hear my heart pounding against my ribs. "We need to tell security," I whispered. We moved quickly through the empty halls, the fluorescent lights casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to shift as we passed. The hospital felt different, tainted, as if that man's presence had left a mark. The security office was dimly lit, the guard on duty barely lifting his eyes until we explained what had just happened. Then his expression changed. A look of recognition tinged with unease. "Did he ask to be in the morgue?" the guard asked, his voice tight. "Yes," I said, the knot in my stomach twisting tighter. The guard's jaw clenched. "We've seen him before. He comes in late, always asking for the same thing. Disappears before we can get to him. No one knows what he wants, but it's never good." A chill seeped into my bones. This man had been trying repeatedly to gain access to the dead. The implications sent my mind racing down dark paths, conjuring images I wished I could unsee. The guard promised to increase patrols, but it felt like a hollow reassurance. As we walked back to the basement office, the silence seemed heavier, charged with something unseen. Every shadow felt deeper, every sound magnified. The hallway to the morgue stretched ahead like an open mouth, and I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching from the dark, hidden places. The rest of my shift dragged on, every minute heavy with the memory of that man's stare and his unnerving request. When my shift finally ended and I stepped into the cold night air, the memory followed me. It followed me home, shadowing me as I locked my doors, and whispered in my ears as I tried to sleep. His pale, desperate face haunted my dreams, morphing into silent, hollow-eyed figures that loomed at the edge of my vision. I never saw him again, but the hospital was never the same. Each time I passed the morgue, I felt it. A cold, unseen presence that reminded me how close we had come to letting something monstrous in. The silence that once signified peace now carried a threat, as if it knew things that should never be spoken. The road twisted ahead of us, dark and serpentine, as we drove deeper into the forest. It was supposed to be a carefree weekend, just me, Jake, and our friends Lisa and Eric, heading out for some much-needed camping. College had drained us, and the promise of fresh air, ghost stories by the fire, and sleeping under a blanket of stars sounded like exactly what we needed. But from the moment we turned off the main road, something felt wrong. The trees seemed to arch closer, their gnarled branches clawing at the night sky like skeletal fingers. The moon, normally so bright, was a dull, distant glow, barely making it through the thick canopy. Shadows flitted across the road, dancing in our headlights, and a chill settled in the pit of my stomach. We kept the radio on, the familiar songs and laughter cutting through the unease. But the levity shattered when a sharp, unexpected curve appeared ahead. Jake, who was driving, swore under his breath and yanked the wheel, but the tires skidded on the wet, moss-slick road. Time splintered. The world spun, headlights flashing across tree trunks, a blur of movement and noise. The last thing I heard was Lisa's scream before everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, we were standing outside the car, the forest eerily silent. The front of the car was crumpled against a thick tree, steam hissing from the engine like a wounded animal. The air was cold and still, the sharp scent of gasoline mixing with damp earth. My head felt light, disconnected, like everything was happening through a fog. Jake stood beside me, his eyes wide and unfocused. Lisa was to my left, pale and shaking, while Eric stared at the wreck with an expression that sent a fresh wave of unease through me. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, but my voice sounded wrong, hollow. Lisa nodded, but her eyes darted between me and the car, never quite meeting my gaze. Eric was silent, his mouth slightly open, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. I followed his line of sight, and my breath caught in my chest. Inside the car, still strapped in their seats, were our bodies. Jake was slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down his temple. My own face was a pale, lifeless mask in the passenger seat, a streak of crimson marring my forehead. Lisa and Eric's forms were equally motionless in the back, their eyes closed, their expressions empty. I took a stumbling step back, my mind racing. Asterisk. This can't be real, asterisk. I reached out, hand trembling, and tried to touch the crumpled metal, but my fingers passed through it like smoke. Panic welled up, hot and suffocating. "We're outside the car," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. "But we're still in there." A low, suffocating silence settled over us, pressing in from all sides. The forest felt darker now, the shadows deeper and shifting as though alive. I turned to Jake, hoping he'd say something, anything to make sense of it all. But his face was drawn, eyes locked on the impossible scene in front of us. "Are we dead?" Eric's voice cracked, breaking the silence. No one answered. The truth sat between us, unsaid, but suffocating. The trees rustled, and I felt an icy chill run down my spine. It wasn't the wind. It felt like something else, like a whisper, a presence lurking just out of sight. The forest was no longer just dark. It was watchful. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my pulse race. I tried to move, to run, but my legs felt leaden, as if roots were holding me in place. "We need to leave," Jake said, his voice shaking but resolute. "We can't stay here." But where could we go? We were trapped, separated from our own bodies, suspended in a place that felt outside of reality. The realization clawed at me, a gnawing terror that made my chest tighten. Minutes or hours passed. I couldn't tell. Time didn't seem to work right anymore. The darkness around us felt alive, stretching and folding in on itself. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the distant hoot of an owl, echoed, distorted. The forest itself seemed to breathe, exhaling shadows that crept closer. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness overtook me. The forest blurred, tilting as if the ground were falling away. I heard Lisa gasp, felt Jake's hand grab for mine, and then everything dimmed to black. When I came to, bright lights flooded my vision. The sterile beep of monitors and the antiseptic scent of a hospital filled my senses. I blinked, disoriented, my body heavy with exhaustion. Beside me, Jake lay in a bed, eyes fluttering open. Lisa and Eric were nearby, their faces bruised but unmistakably alive. "You're all awake," a nurse said, appearing at my side with a relieved smile. "You had a bad accident, but you're going to be okay. You've been out for a couple of days." Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me from the nightmare. But as I glanced at my friends, I saw the same haunted look reflected in their eyes. It had been too real. The crash, our bodies in that twisted wreck, the feeling of being watched by the dark. As we lay there in silence, the memory of that forest lingered, heavy and cold. I could still feel the oppressive weight of the trees and the whisper of the shadows that had seemed to close in around us. And even though we were safe, surrounded by the sterile comfort of the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had brought something back with us. Something that watched, waited, and whispered in the spaces where the light didn't reach. We had survived, but the nightmare hadn't ended. It was only waiting for night to fall again. It happened a few years ago. My best friend Alex and I had always been drawn to the strange and unexplained. We were young, reckless, and craving an adventure that would break the monotony of our small town. When we heard whispers about an abandoned house perched on the edge of the woods, a place locals claimed was haunted, it felt like the perfect challenge. We never could have guessed how deeply we'd come to regret that decision. The house sat alone on a hill, with nature creeping up its walls, as if trying to reclaim it. The windows were shattered and dark, staring out like hollow eyes. The front yard was a sea of weeds that brushed against our legs as we walked up the cracked path. A sense of unease settled in my chest, heavy and cold. But Alex, always the fearless one, pushed forward with a smirk. "Come on, just a quick look," he said, nudging the front door, which groaned open, revealing a dark, yawning entrance. I swallowed hard, nodding as I followed him inside. The air changed the moment we crossed the threshold. It was colder, thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Dust floated in the faint beams of moonlight that managed to squeeze through the cracked shutters. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. Alex walked confidently ahead, kicking aside broken pieces of furniture. The floor creaked beneath our weight, the sound sharp and unnatural. My fingers brushed against peeling wallpaper as we moved deeper into the house, and a shiver raced down my spine. The sensation of being watched grew stronger, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. "Maybe we should head back," I muttered, my voice barely more than a whisper. But Alex only grinned over his shoulder. "Relax, it's just an old house." Before I could argue, we reached a staircase that spiraled up into darkness. The banister was splintered, and each step creaked under Alex's weight as he started to climb. I hesitated at the base, staring up at the shadowy landing that seemed to stretch endlessly. "Come on," Alex called, a challenge in his voice. With a deep breath, I followed, the wood groaning underfoot as if protesting our presence. The upper floor was even colder, and the smell intensified, a rancid stench that made my stomach turn. We moved down a narrow hallway, and I noticed a trail of dark stains leading toward a door at the end. Before I could point it out, we both froze at the sound. A deep, guttural growl that rumbled through the hallway. Alex's confident smirk faltered. The growl came again, louder, vibrating through my bones. My mouth went dry, and I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice cracking. But Alex shook his head, eyes fixed on the door ahead. "It's probably just the wind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He stepped forward, reaching for the knob. "Don't," I hissed, but it was too late. The door creaked open, revealing a room cloaked in darkness. At first, it seemed empty, but then I saw it. A shadow hunched in the corner, unmoving. My breath caught as two eyes, dull and luminous, blinked open. The growl ceased, and silence suffocated the space around us. Then, a voice, low and gravelly, seeped from the darkness. "Leave, or never leave again." It felt like a vice had gripped my chest. The temperature dropped so sharply, I could see my breath. Alex's hand twitched, and I knew he felt the same paralyzing dread. The shadow shifted, uncoiling like a predator, and that was all it took. We bolted. The hallway seemed longer now, the floor groaning beneath our frenzied footsteps. The house trembled, groaning as if alive, each shadow stretching toward us. We stumbled down the stairs, barely keeping our balance, and raced for the front door. The air seemed to thicken, resisting us, pushing us back toward the darkness. We crashed through the broken gate and ran until the house was just a silhouette against the starless sky. Panting, bent over with exhaustion, I risked a glance back. The house stood silent, dark, but it felt like it was watching, waiting. We never spoke of that night again, but the memories clung to me like a cold, damp fog. I avoided that hill, that cursed house, for years afterward. I never wanted to hear those words echo in my mind again. Leave, or never leave again. Whatever we had disturbed that night was more than just shadows and stories. It was real, it was hungry, and it had marked us. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see those dim, malevolent eyes in the corner, watching and waiting for the day someone else is foolish enough to enter. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones.